I used to think that the most painful part of growing old would be the physical aches, the arthritis settling into my knuckles, the way my knees protest when the weather turns damp, or the fading of my eyesight. But I was wrong. The most agonizing part of aging isn't what happens to your body. It's what happens to your presence. It's the slow, quiet process of becoming invisible in your own life, a ghost haunting the very home you broke your back to build. My name is Margaret Sullivan, though everyone has called me Maggie for as long as I can remember. I am 66 years old, a retired registered nurse, and for the last 3 years I have been a stranger in my own house. It was a Tuesday morning, crisp and biting with the early autumn chill, when the true depth of my invisibility became undeniable. I was standing at the kitchen sink, my hands plunged into scalding, soapy water, scrubbing the hardened remains of a Gruyere cheese fondue from a ceramic pot. Chloe, my 31-year-old daughter-in-law, had hosted a casual get-together for her influencer friends the night before. By casual, she meant purchasing hundreds of dollars of imported cheeses and artisan crackers on my son's credit card, leaving the house looking like a hurricane had ripped through a Williams-Sonoma, and retiring to bed at midnight without carrying a single plate to the sink. I didn't mind the cleaning. I really didn't. After 40 years on the surgical floor of St. Jude's Hospital, cleaning up messes was practically woven into my DNA. What I minded was the silence, the utter lack of acknowledgement. Footsteps clicked against the hardwood floor behind me. Chloe walked in, wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my first car, her eyes glued to her iPhone screen. She smelled of expensive espresso and that sickeningly sweet vanilla perfume she bathed in. "Morning," I said, keeping my tone light, trying to ignore the ache in my lower back. Chloe barely glanced up. "Morning? Oh, by the way, Maggie, could you switch laundry detergents? The one you buy at Costco leaves this awful cheap soap smell on Liam's shirts. It's practically giving me a migraine. I texted you a link to this organic small batch brand from Portland. Just order that from now on." She didn't wait for an answer. She poured herself a cup of the coffee I had brewed at 6 in the morning, stepped carefully over a stray napkin from her party, and walked out of the kitchen. Not a thank you for the coffee, not a sorry for the mess, just a directive, like I was the hired help. A moment later, my son Liam shuffled in. He was 35, though in a lot of ways he was still the teenager waiting for me to pack his lunch. He had dark circles under his eyes, the result of staying up late playing video games to decompress from his mid-level marketing job. "Liam, honey," I said, drying my hands on a towel, "could you maybe help me take the trash out before you leave for work? The bags are too heavy for me to lift into the bin today. My shoulder is acting up." He poured his coffee, letting out a long, dramatic sigh. "Mom, I'm already running late. I have a massive presentation today. Just leave it on the porch. I'll do it tonight. Or ask Chloe." "Chloe is busy with her phone," I murmured, though I knew it was useless. "Just leave it, Mom. God, you always stress about the little things." He gave me a quick, obligatory pat on the shoulder, a pat devoid of any real warmth, and grabbed his keys. "See you tonight." The front door slammed shut. I stood alone in the spotless kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. I looked at my hands. They were rough, veined and scarred from decades of drawing blood, inserting IVs, and holding the hands of dying patients. I had worked 12-hour night shifts, missing school plays and holidays, all so I could put Liam through college without him taking out a dime in student loans. I had paid off this 4-bedroom house in the suburbs of Chicago with the sweat of my brow and the deterioration of my spine. When Liam and Chloe got married, they couldn't afford a down payment on a house because of their crushing credit card debt. Debt Chloe accumulated to maintain her lifestyle, and Liam enabled out of spinelessness. I did what any mother would do. I opened my doors. "Stay for a year," I had said. "Save your money." That was 3 years ago. They hadn't saved a penny. Instead, they had slowly colonized my home. My vintage floral armchairs were replaced by sharp, uncomfortable modern sofas. My family photos were taken down because they clashed with the aesthetic, and I was relegated to the role of a silent, live-in maid. I swallowed the lump of bitterness in my throat. "They're young," I told myself, the same lie I recited every morning. "They're just struggling. You're a mother. Mother's sacrifice." I finished the dishes, wiped down the granite countertops, and decided to run to the grocery store. My phone, a 5-year-old Android whose battery drained faster than water through a sieve, beeped a low battery warning. I plugged it into the kitchen charger, grabbed my purse, and headed out to my old Subaru. It was while I was standing in the produce aisle of the local Trader Joe's, debating whether I could justify the cost of fresh raspberries, that the grocery store's PA system announced a call for me at the customer service desk. I walked over, confused. Nobody knew I was here. "Mrs. Sullivan?" the teenage cashier asked, holding out the store's landline. "Some guy named Robert Vance says it's an emergency. He called your cell, but it went straight to voicemail, so he tracked your GPS through your car's OnStar or something. Sounded important." My heart dropped into my stomach. Robert Vance. That name belonged to a past I hadn't touched in years. He was an estate attorney in Seattle and the oldest friend of my brother, Thomas. Thomas and I hadn't spoken in nearly a decade, not out of anger, but out of the slow, tragic drift that sometimes happens to families. He was a lifelong bachelor, a sharp, cynical businessman who moved to the Pacific Northwest to build commercial properties. He always thought I was too soft, too giving. "Maggie, you let people bleed you dry," he had told me the last time we spoke. "One day you'll look down and realize you have nothing left to give, and no one will care." I had hung up on him. I took the receiver with trembling fingers. "Hello? Robert?" "Maggie." The voice on the other end was heavy, gravelly with age. "I am so sorry to track you down like this. I tried your cell. My battery died. Robert, what's going on? Is it Thomas?" There was a long pause. The ambient noise of the grocery store, the beeping registers, the chatter of shoppers, seemed to fade into a vacuum. "Thomas passed away 3 days ago, Maggie. It was a massive heart attack, in his sleep. It was painless." I gripped the edge of the customer service counter. A wave of profound, suffocating sorrow washed over me. Thomas, my big brother, the boy who used to chase me through the sprinkler in our backyard in Ohio, gone. The guilt of those 10 years of silence crashed down on me like a physical weight. I didn't know," I whispered, tears hot and fast pricking my eyes. "Oh God, I should have called him. I should have—" "Maggie, stop," Robert said gently. "Thomas didn't want you to feel guilty. In fact, he spoke of you often, very often. Which brings me to the second reason I'm calling. You are the sole beneficiary of his estate." I blinked, wiping a tear from my cheek. "What? No. Thomas had business partners. He had a whole life out there." "He bought his partners out 5 years ago," Robert explained, his tone shifting into professional, measured cadences. "He was entirely independent. Maggie, I need you to listen to me carefully. Thomas's estate has cleared probate. He left you a liquid cash account of $1.2 million. The numbers didn't make sense. They sounded like a foreign language. $1.2 million? Yes, Robert continued. And he also left you full ownership of a commercial retail plaza in downtown Seattle. It currently houses a Starbucks, a boutique gym, and a law firm. It generates roughly $15,000 a month in net rental income. It's all yours, Maggie, free and clear." My knees literally buckled. I had to lean heavily against the counter. The teenage cashier looked at me with wide, alarmed eyes, but I waved him off. Over $1 million in cash, $15,000 a month in passive income. I was a woman who balanced her checkbook down to the penny. I cut coupons. I debated the cost of raspberries. And suddenly, in the span of a 3-minute phone call, I possessed generational wealth. "Why?" I choked out, a sob finally escaping my chest. "Why would he do that?" "Because he loved you," Robert said softly. "And because he left a letter. I'll mail it to you, but to summarize, he knew you sacrificed your whole life for your husband, and then for your son. He wanted you to finally have a life of your own. He wanted you to be untouchable." Untouchable. The word resonated in my chest, striking a chord that had been dormant for decades. "I'll need you to fly out to Seattle sometime next week to sign the final transfer papers," Robert said. "But the funds are secure. You are a very wealthy woman, Maggie." When I hung up the phone, I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or laugh. I walked out to my old, dented Subaru and sat behind the steering wheel for a long time. I cried for Thomas. I cried for the years we lost. But then, slowly, the grief morphed into a blooming, radiant warmth in my chest. Hope. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in so long I had almost forgotten its texture. My mind began to race with possibilities, not for myself, but for Liam. I can pay off their credit card debt, I thought, my heart accelerating. I can buy them their own house. A nice one, with a big yard for the children they might have. I can finally fix Liam's life. We can be a happy family again without the stress of money hanging over us. I was buzzing with an electric, almost manic energy as I drove the 3 miles back to my house. I couldn't wait to see their faces. I couldn't wait to tell my son that all our struggles were over. That his uncle, bless his cranky soul, had saved us. I pulled into the driveway. Liam's Audi, a car he absolutely could not afford, but leased anyway to look good for his colleagues, was parked out front. He must have come home early for lunch, or maybe his presentation was canceled. Chloe's white SUV was there too. I practically skipped up the front steps, fumbling with my keys. My phone was still dead, sitting on the kitchen counter where I left it. I wanted to call Robert back and ask a few more questions before I broke the news, just to be sure I had the facts straight. I unlocked the front door and pushed it open quietly. The house was silent. Liam and Chloe must be upstairs in their bedroom. I walked into the kitchen. My dead android was still plugged into the wall. Right next to it, sitting on the granite island, was Chloe's iPad Pro. It was propped up on a sleek metal stand, the screen glowing brightly. She never turned the auto lock on. I walked over, intending to use the iPad to dial Robert's office number, assuming I could use the Wi-Fi calling feature. I tapped the screen to wake it fully. It was open to the iMessage app. Chloe's messages were synced with her phone. I didn't mean to snoop. God is my witness. I have never been a woman who pries into her children's privacy. But the text on the screen was massive, bold, and impossible to miss. And the name at the top of the group chat caught my eye immediately. Liam and Marcus, broker. My hand hovered over the screen. I froze. Marcus, broker? My eyes darted to the last message sent, time-stamped just 10 minutes ago. It was from Marcus. Marcus, broker. Docs are finalized. The $50,000 HELOC is ready for disbursement. Just need to confirm the wiring instructions to your joint checking account. HELOC? A home equity line of credit? On what house? A cold, icy dread began to pool in my stomach, neutralizing the warm buzz of the inheritance in a matter of seconds. I scrolled up. My finger was trembling so violently I almost dropped the iPad. Liam. Perfect. Thanks, Marcus. You're a lifesaver. We were drowning with the Amex bill. Marcus, broker. No problem, man. Just remember the bank is going to place a secondary lien on the property. As long as your mother's signature on the digital DocuSign holds up in the system, we're golden. You're sure she won't notice the hard pull on her credit? My breath hitched in my throat. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt too thin to breathe. My mother's signature. Chloe. She doesn't even know how to log into her own bank account, Marcus. The old bat still balances a paper checkbook. She won't notice a thing. Besides, Liam took care of the email verification. Liam. Yeah, I set up a filter in her Gmail to auto-delete anything from the bank. She's clueless. I clutched the edge of the granite island, my knuckles turning white. My son. The boy I had carried for 9 months. The boy whose fever I had cooled with wet washcloths at 3 a.m. The boy I had scrubbed bedpans to put through college. He had forged my signature. He had taken out a $50,000 loan against my house, the house I owned free and clear, to pay off his wife's credit card debt. He had committed felony fraud against his own mother. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to clamp a hand over my mouth. I tasted bile at the back of my throat. I wanted to throw up. I wanted to scream. But my eyes were glued to the screen, reading the messages that predated the loan approval. The messages from the night before while I was scrubbing their cheese fondue out of a pot. Chloe. So what happens when the first payment on the HELOC is due? We can't afford an extra $600 a month right now. Liam. We won't have to pay it for long. I talked to that lawyer friend of mine. If we can get a doctor to sign off that Mom is starting to show signs of dementia, I can get medical and financial power of attorney. Chloe. Are you sure? She's annoying, but she's not senile. Liam. We just have to make her look senile. Gaslight her a bit. Once I have POA, we put her in that state-run assisted living facility out in Rockford. Medicare covers most of it. Then we sell this house, pay off the HELOC, pay off all our debt, and use the rest of the equity to buy our own place downtown. Chloe. God, yes. Please. I can't stand the smell of her cheap soap anymore. And the way she breathes when she eats. It's disgusting. How soon can we do it? Liam. Give it a few months. We need to build a case that she's losing her mind first. But it's going to happen, babe. We're going to get our lives back. I stared at the screen until the words blurred into a sea of meaningless gray pixels. Get their lives back. By destroying mine. By locking me in a state-run facility, places I knew intimately from my nursing days, places that smelled of urine and despair, where the elderly were parked in wheelchairs facing blank walls until they expired. My son was planning to throw me away like a broken appliance, steal the equity I had worked 40 years to build, and he was doing it with the enthusiastic support of the woman sleeping in the guest room upstairs. The silence of the house pressed in on me, but it was no longer a lonely silence. It was the silence of a trap waiting to spring. For 66 years, I had been the good woman, the forgiving mother, the tireless martyr who turned the other cheek and found excuses for the bad behavior of the people I loved. He's just stressed, I would say. She's just young and doesn't know better. As I stood there, staring at the digital blueprint of my own demise, something inside me, something soft and yielding that had defined my entire existence, snapped. It didn't break with a loud noise. It shattered quietly, turning into sharp, jagged ice. Thomas was right. I had let people bleed me dry. And now, they were coming for the bones. I carefully tapped the iPad screen, closing the iMessage app and returning it to the home screen exactly as I had found it. I unplugged my Android phone. It had 5% battery. Enough. I didn't march upstairs and confront them. I didn't scream or cry or demand answers. A confrontation would only give them the opportunity to lie, to manipulate, to pretend it was a misunderstanding. Instead, I took a deep, steadying breath. My heart rate slowed. The nausea faded, replaced by a crystalline, terrifying clarity. I walked over to the kitchen sink, turned on the cold water, and splashed my face. I looked at my reflection in the window pane above the sink. I looked old, yes, but my eyes were harder than they had been an hour ago. I picked up my purse and walked quietly back out the front door, locking it behind me. I got into my Subaru and drove down the street, pulling over into the parking lot of a nearby park. I turned on my phone. I didn't call Liam. I didn't call Chloe. I called Robert Vance. "Maggie?" he answered, sounding surprised. "Everything all right?" "Robert," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the weeping widow he had spoken to an hour prior. "I need to ask you about the inheritance. Specifically, how quickly can we set up a blind LLC? And how fast can you recommend a ruthless real estate attorney here in Illinois?" There was a brief pause on the line. I could almost hear Robert smiling. "Maggie," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "What are we doing?" "We," I replied, staring out at the empty park, "are going to protect what is mine. And then we are going to teach my son a lesson in economics." The hardest part about discovering that the people you love are actively plotting your ruin isn't the initial shock. The shock fades eventually. The hardest part is walking back through your own front door, looking them in the eye, and pretending you don't know a thing. When I returned to the house that afternoon, I found Liam and Chloe sitting on the living room sofa, watching some reality renovation show on HGTV. Liam was drinking a craft beer, and Chloe was scrolling mindlessly on her phone. They looked like a perfectly normal, comfortably boring suburban couple. "Hey, Mom," Liam called out, not taking his eyes off the television. "You were gone a while? Get everything you needed?" I paused in the foyer, carefully hanging my coat on the rack. I forced my muscles to relax, painting a look of mild, absent-minded fatigue onto my face. "Just a few errands, honey," I said, my voice adopting the slightly breathy, tired cadence they expected from me. The lines at Trader Joe's were dreadful. "I told you not to go on a Tuesday," Chloe chimed in, her tone dripping with that condescending sweetness she reserved exclusively for me. "You always forget. You always forget." It was a subtle phrase, a tiny little seed planted in the soil of our daily conversation. Before today, I would have brushed it off as Chloe just being Chloe. Now I recognized it for what it was, the opening move of a calculated psychological campaign. Over the next 2 weeks, the house became a battlefield of microaggressions, though I was the only one who knew a war had been declared. While Liam and Chloe went about their days, Liam at his marketing job, Chloe working on her influencer brand from the dining room table, I spent my mornings on secure encrypted phone calls with Robert Vance and his recommended Chicago real estate attorney. We were moving fast. Thomas's estate funds had officially cleared into a secure private trust. Robert had helped me establish a blind entity, Ironclad Holdings LLC, registered in Delaware to ensure maximum anonymity. To the outside world, and certainly to my son, Maggie Sullivan was still a cash-strapped widow living on a fixed pension. In reality, I was the quiet CEO of a multi-million-dollar portfolio. But inside the walls of my home, my son and his wife were accelerating their timeline. It started with my car keys. I always, without fail, placed my keys in the ceramic bowl by the front door. One Thursday morning, I was getting ready to drive to the pharmacy. I reached into the bowl. Empty. I spent 20 minutes searching the foyer, the kitchen, and the living room. Finally, Chloe walked downstairs, sipping her artisanal coffee. "Looking for something, Maggie?" she asked innocently. "My keys. I swear I put them in the bowl." Chloe sighed, a loud, exaggerated sound of pity. She walked straight to the refrigerator, opened it, and pulled my keys from the butter compartment. She held them up by the lanyard, her head tilted sympathetically. "In the fridge, Maggie? Really?" She gave a soft, patronizing chuckle. "You've been doing this a lot lately, misplacing things, putting them in weird spots. Are you feeling okay?" I stared at the cold metal keys dangling from her perfectly manicured fingers. I knew with absolute certainty that I had not put them in the refrigerator. I knew Chloe had moved them. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. I don't know how they got in there," I stammered, leaning into the performance. I let my shoulders slump, pressing my fingers to my temples. My mind must have been somewhere else. "You need to be careful," Liam said, walking into the kitchen and adjusting his tie. "Driving might not be safe if you're this distracted, Mom. Maybe you should stay home today." "Maybe you're right," I whispered, taking the keys and retreating to my room. The gaslighting escalated rapidly. Mail I had left on the counter would vanish, only to be found in the trash can. The television remote would disappear and turn up under my pillow. But the most sinister incident happened 3 days later. I had been upstairs organizing my closet when the shrill, piercing shriek of the smoke detector shattered the quiet. I rushed downstairs to find the kitchen filled with a thin haze of gray smoke. The front left burner of the gas stove was on high, a dry, empty frying pan sitting directly over the open flame, its non-stick coating beginning to scorch and smoke. Chloe was standing by the island, aggressively fanning the smoke alarm with a dish towel, her face a mask of manufactured panic. "Maggie, what on earth were you doing?" she shrieked over the beeping alarm. I quickly reached forward and clicked the burner off, my heart pounding. "I wasn't doing anything. I haven't been in the kitchen for hours." Liam came bounding down the stairs. "What the hell is going on?" "Your mother left the stove on with an empty pan," Chloe cried out, pointing an accusing finger at me. "I was in the living room and smelled smoke. Liam, she could have burned the house down. What if I hadn't been here?" "Mom, are you kidding me?" Liam's voice cracked with angry disbelief. He grabbed my arm, squeezing it a little too hard. "You left the gas on?" "I didn't," I protested, looking back and forth between them. I looked at the pan. It was the one Chloe used for her morning egg white omelets. "I haven't cooked anything since breakfast." "Maggie, I literally saw you standing at the stove 15 minutes ago," Chloe lied, her eyes wide, pleading with Liam to believe her. "You were staring blankly at the wall. I asked if you were okay and you just mumbled something and walked upstairs." The lie was so smooth, so effortlessly delivered, that for a fraction of a second, I actually felt a dizzying wave of disorientation. That was the terror of gaslighting. When two people you trust look you in the eye and tell you reality is not what you think it is, your brain instinctively tries to bridge the gap. But the dizziness passed, replaced by a cold, hard fury. They were establishing a paper trail of incompetence. The missing keys, the memory lapses, the dangerous stove incident. They were building the narrative they would eventually present to a judge to strip me of my rights. "I'm sorry," I said, forcing my voice to tremble. I looked down at my hands, letting them shake visibly. I don't remember turning it on. I'm so sorry, Chloe." Liam exchanged a heavy, significant look with his wife. "Mom, this is getting serious. We need to talk about seeing a doctor." "I'll be more careful," I whispered, retreating upstairs like a scolded child. Once inside my room with the door locked, my trembling stopped immediately. I walked to my mirror and stared at myself. The physical toll of this charade was starting to show. I looked exhausted. There were dark circles under my eyes, and my skin had a pallid, grayish hue. At first, I chalked the physical exhaustion up to the immense stress of the situation. Hiding $1 million inheritance while actively being psychologically tortured by your own son was enough to drain anyone's energy. But as the days bled into the second week, the exhaustion took on a different, more troubling quality. It wasn't just fatigue. It was a chemical heaviness. Every morning I woke up feeling as though I was swimming upward through a pool of dark syrup. My mouth tasted like pennies and old cotton. My vision would blur at the edges, and for the first few hours of the day, my cognitive functions were genuinely sluggish. I found myself slurring a word here and there, tripping over the edge of the living room rug, actually forgetting why I had walked into a room. My 40 years of nursing experience, a clinical intuition refined in the chaotic wards of St. Jude's, began to sound an alarm in the back of my mind. Stress causes insomnia, palpitations, and irritability. It does not cause a metallic taste in the mouth, severe morning lethargy, and motor skill impairment. I sat on the edge of my bed, tracing my routine backward. What had changed? What was I ingesting? I ate the same food I always did. I took my daily multivitamin and a standard blood pressure pill from bottles I kept locked in my own bathroom. The only new addition to my routine had started roughly 2 weeks ago, right around the time Liam and Chloe accelerated their gaslighting campaign. The evening tea. Chloe had suddenly started playing the role of the attentive daughter-in-law right before bedtime. Every night at 9 p.m. she would bring me a steaming mug of chamomile tea. "To help you relax, Maggie. You've seemed so on edge lately." She would stand there, smiling that cloying smile, until I drank it down. A chill crawled up my spine, settling at the base of my neck. That night, when Chloe knocked softly on my door and handed me the floral ceramic mug, I took it with a grateful smile. "Thank you, dear. You're so sweet to me." "Drink up, Maggie. It's good for your nerves," she said, hovering in the doorway. "I will. Just going to let it cool for a minute while I finish this chapter," I said, tapping the paperback book on my lap. She lingered for a moment, her eyes darting to the cup, before finally nodding and closing the door. As soon as the latch clicked, I threw the covers off. I didn't pour the tea down the adjoining bathroom sink. She might check the trap or smell it. Instead, I opened my closet, pulled out a sterilized thermos I used for road trips, and carefully poured the hot chamomile liquid inside, sealing it tight. I went into the bathroom, rinsed the mug thoroughly with hot water, and left it empty on my nightstand. The next morning, the difference was staggering. I woke up at 6 a.m. and my mind was crystal clear. The metallic taste was gone. The heavy, syrup-like fog that had clouded my brain was completely absent. I was being poisoned. I didn't panic. I got dressed, grabbed the thermos, and slipped out of the house before Liam or Chloe were even awake. I drove straight into the city, heading to a small, nondescript office building in the West Loop. I was going to see Evelyn. Evelyn Carter was a woman who practically lived in the shadows. We had met 20 years ago in the emergency room. I was the charge nurse, and she was a private investigator who had been brought in with a stab wound she refused to report to the police. I stitched her up, kept my mouth shut, and we had been unlikely friends ever since. Now retired, Evelyn still maintained a vast network of contacts in law enforcement and private laboratories across Chicago. I walked into her cluttered office. Evelyn, a sharp-featured black woman in her late 60s with silver dreadlocks and piercing eyes, looked up from her computer. "Maggie Sullivan," she said, leaning back in her chair. "You look like you're either about to rob a bank or bury a body." "I need a favor, Evie. A fast one," I said, placing the thermos on her desk. "I need a rush toxicology screen on this liquid. I need to know exactly what's in it, down to the microgram." Evelyn looked at the thermos, then at my face. Her demeanor instantly shifted from casual to dead serious. She didn't ask questions. She picked up the thermos. "I have a guy at a private forensic lab. It'll cost a few $100 to expedite. I'll pay double if he gives me the results by noon." I spent the next 4 hours sitting in a diner across the street, drinking black coffee and watching the rain streak the windows. My mind was a calm, terrible void. If I was right, my son, the boy I had read bedtime stories to, was allowing his wife to chemically alter my brain. He was complicit in drugging his own mother to manufacture a dementia diagnosis. At 12:15 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was Evelyn. "Come back up," she said. Her voice was uncharacteristically grim. When I sat back down in her office, Evelyn slid a printed lab report across the desk. I put on my reading glasses. My eyes scanned the chemical breakdowns, the baseline ingredients of chamomile and honey, until I hit the anomaly highlighted in yellow, zolpidem tartrate. Ambien, Evelyn said quietly, translating the chemical name. A heavy-duty sedative hypnotic. Whoever made this crushed up at least 10 to 15 milligrams of it and dissolved it in the hot water. That's a massive dose for an elderly woman, Maggie. Taken consistently over a couple of weeks, it induces severe daytime lethargy, anterograde amnesia, cognitive impairment, and ataxia. You'd look and act exactly like someone rapidly declining into dementia. I stared at the word on the paper. Zolpidem. Maggie, Evelyn's voice broke through the ringing in my ears. Who gave you this? My daughter-in-law, I whispered. Evelyn cursed under her breath. I'm calling my contacts at CPD right now. We are getting a squad car to your house. This is a felony. This is attempted manslaughter and elder abuse. She reached for her desk phone, but my hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with a strength that surprised both of us. No, I said. Evelyn stared at me. Maggie, are you out of your mind? They are poisoning you. If we call the cops now, what happens? I asked, my voice cold, detached, completely analytical. Chloe will swear she mixed up her own prescription with my vitamins. Liam will play the shocked, devoted son. A high-priced defense attorney will plead it down to accidental negligence. They might get probation, but they will still walk away, and they will still owe $50,000 on my house. So what do you want to do? Evelyn asked, slowly lowering the phone. I want to destroy them, I said. The words tasted like ash, but they were the truest words I had ever spoken. I don't want them to just get a slap on the wrist. I want them to lose everything. I want them to feel the exact level of helplessness they are trying to force onto me. I need them to commit. I need them to trap themselves so completely that no lawyer in the world can dig them out. Evelyn watched me for a long time. Then a slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. You know, Maggie, I always thought you were too nice for your own good. I'm glad to see I was wrong. What do you need me to do? Hold on to this lab report. Keep it secure, I instructed. And find me the best hidden cameras money can buy. Small ones, audio and video. I drove home that afternoon with a new, terrifying sense of purpose. I was no longer a victim waiting for the axe to fall. I was the architect of their ruin. That night, when Chloe brought me the chamomile tea, I smiled warmly. I waited for her to leave, poured it into the bathroom sink, and washed it down. But the next morning, the performance of my life began. I dragged myself out of bed, purposefully making my hair disheveled. I walked downstairs in mismatched slippers, shuffling my feet. When Liam asked me a question about the electric bill, I stared at him blankly for a full 10 seconds before giving an answer that made absolutely no sense. I let my hands shake when I poured my coffee, spilling it on the counter. I saw the looks they exchanged, the suppressed glee, the triumph. They thought the drugs were finally breaking my brain. 2 days later, Liam approached me while I was sitting in my armchair, staring blankly at a muted television. He knelt beside me, holding a clipboard with a few pages of medical paperwork. Mom, he said gently, using his best, most empathetic voice. The insurance company needs you to update your authorized contact list for the new year, just in case of an emergency. Can you sign this for me? I knew what it was. It wasn't an insurance form. The font was wrong. The letterhead was generic. It was a preliminary consent form, likely an intake document for the shady psychiatrist they had lined up to officially diagnose me. Oh, of course, Liam, I mumbled, my words slurring perfectly. I took the pen. I didn't sign my name, Margaret Sullivan. With a violently shaking hand, I purposefully scrawled a jagged, illegible mess that looked more like Marge Sullivan, trailing off the line entirely. Liam took the clipboard back. He looked at the mangled, pathetic signature. A small, cruel smile ghosted across his lips before he caught himself. Thanks, Mom, he said softly. Don't worry. I'm going to take care of everything. The waiting game is a peculiar kind of psychological torture. For the next 5 days, I lived a double life in my own home. By day, I was the deteriorating, confused mother, stumbling over my words and forgetting where I put the television remote. By night, while Liam and Chloe slept securely in their upstairs bedroom, I was an absolute machine. Evelyn, true to her word, had procured 3 state-of-the-art microcameras. They were ingeniously disguised. One is a standard USB wall charger I plugged in behind the kitchen island. One is a generic carbon monoxide detector I mounted in the hallway, and the last embedded in a decorative faux succulent I placed on the living room coffee table. Sitting in the dark of my bedroom, using a burner laptop Robert Vance had messengered to me, I watched the live feeds. The things I heard my son and his wife say when they thought I was out of earshot or asleep would have broken me a month ago. Now they only served as fuel. "Did you see her at dinner?" Chloe's voice echoed through my headphones one Tuesday night. The night vision camera caught her painting her toenails on my sofa. She completely zoned out. The tea is working perfectly. God, I hope the doctor buys it. If I have to spend one more month looking at her ugly orthopedic shoes by the front door, I'm going to lose my mind. "He'll buy it," Liam replied. He was pacing the living room, a tumbler of expensive bourbon, bought with his new fraudulently obtained HELOC funds, no doubt, in his hand. "Marcus said this guy, Dr. Sterling, is a rubber stamp. We pay his consultation fee out of pocket. He gives us the dementia diagnosis, and we file for medical and financial power of attorney by Friday. Then we can finally start touring the Rockford facility for her. Make sure they have a locked ward," Chloe added casually, blowing on her nails. "We don't want her wandering out and trying to take a bus back here once we list the house." I closed the laptop screen. I didn't cry. My tear ducts felt as though they had been permanently cauterized. My son wasn't just planning to steal from me. He was actively anticipating locking me away in a secure psychiatric ward to ensure his theft went uninterrupted. The morning of the appointment arrived with a dreary, overcast sky that perfectly matched the suffocating atmosphere in the house. "Mom," Liam said softly, knocking on my door at 8 in the morning. He poked his head in, wearing his best concerned son expression. "Get dressed, okay? I made an appointment for you with a specialist. Just a routine geriatric wellness check. You've been so forgetful lately. Chloe and I we're worried about you." "A doctor?" I asked, making my voice tremble, pulling the duvet up to my chin like a frightened child. "But I feel fine, Liam. Just a little tired." "It's just a checkup, Maggie," Chloe called out from the hallway, her voice dripping with artificial saccharine. "We'll go out for pancakes afterward. Won't that be fun?" I wanted to vomit, but I nodded meekly. I dressed in a faded cardigan and a pair of loose slacks, intentionally buttoning my sweater unevenly to complete the look of a woman losing her grip on reality. I slid my oversized leather purse over my shoulder. Inside, resting against my wallet, was a crisp, pristine manila folder containing the toxicology report and a few other interesting documents Robert had prepared. The drive to the clinic was agonizingly tense. Liam drove, his fingers tapping anxiously against the steering wheel. Chloe sat in the passenger seat, aggressively texting, probably Marcus the broker, updating him on their progress. I sat in the back, staring out the window, practicing my breathing. In for 4 seconds, hold for 4, out for 4. The clinical breathing exercises I used to teach preoperative patients. Dr. Arthur Sterling's clinic was not located in a prestigious medical pavilion. It was tucked away in a high-end, discreet corporate park in the northern suburbs. The waiting room reeked of generic potpourri and desperation. When we were called back, Dr. Sterling was exactly what I expected. He was a man in his late 50s, wearing a tailored suit under an unbuttoned white coat, sporting a dark tan that suggested he spent more time on the golf course than reading medical journals. He had the slick, polished demeanor of a salesman rather than a healer. "Margaret, so nice to meet you," he said, extending a hand. He didn't look me in the eye. He looked slightly past me. A classic tell of a doctor who didn't actually view his patient as a person, but as a checklist. I gave him a weak, trembling handshake. Liam guided me to the examination chair, acting as though I might shatter into a million pieces. "So, Liam," Dr. Sterling began, sitting at his desk and interlacing his fingers. He spoke entirely to my son, completely ignoring me. "You mentioned over the phone that your mother has been exhibiting significant cognitive decline. Memory lapses, confusion, potentially dangerous behavior at home." "It's been terrifying, doctor," Liam said, his voice cracking with the performance of a lifetime. He actually squeezed out a tear. "She left the gas stove on last week, almost burned the house down. She forgets her own name sometimes. My wife, Chloe, has had to become her full-time caretaker, and it's breaking our hearts." Chloe reached over and rubbed Liam's back consolingly. "We just want what's best for her, Dr. Sterling. We want her to be safe. We need to be able to manage her affairs so she doesn't accidentally ruin herself financially." "I understand." Dr. Sterling nodded solemnly. It is a tragic but common reality of aging. In order to process the paperwork for a medical and financial power of attorney, I'll need to conduct a standard mini-mental state examination. It's very brief. He finally turned his chair to face me. He picked up a clipboard and a pen. He adopted the slow, loud, patronizing tone people use when talking to toddlers or the deaf. "Margaret, can you hear me, dear?" I blinked slowly, letting my mouth hang open just a fraction. "Yes, doctor." "Excellent. Now, Margaret, can you tell me what year it is?" I paused, looking around the room frantically, acting as though I was searching the beige walls for the answer. "It's 19... No, it's 2012? Liam let out a heavy, tragic sigh. Chloe shook her head sadly. Dr. Sterling made a large checkmark on his clipboard. "Okay, can you tell me who the President of the United States is?" "Obama," I whispered, my voice incredibly fragile. Another checkmark. Dr. Sterling looked at Liam with a grave expression that practically screamed, "Don't worry, you'll have your paperwork in 10 minutes. "All right, Margaret. One last thing, Doctor," Sterling said, pulling a blank sheet of paper and handing it to me along with the pen. "I want you to draw a clock face. Put all the numbers in the right places and draw the hands to show the time as 10 minutes past 11. This was the classic test. A patient with advanced dementia or severe cognitive impairment loses spatial reasoning. They will bunch all the numbers on one side or draw the hands outside the circle. I took the pen. My hand was shaking so violently that the pen rattled against the clipboard. Liam leaned forward, his eyes hungry, waiting for me to scribble the messy, confused lines that would legally sign away my freedom, my house, and my life. I placed the tip of the pen on the paper, and then I stopped shaking. Instantly, the tremor in my hand vanished, replaced by the rock-solid steadiness of a nurse who had started thousands of IVs in high-pressure trauma situations. I sat up straight in the examination chair. The stooped, fragile posture melted away. I rolled my shoulders back, looking Dr. Sterling dead in the eyes. The patronizing smile on his face faltered. With perfect, swift precision, I drew a flawless circle. I filled in the numbers, evenly spaced, geometrically perfect. I drew the minute hand pointing exactly to the 2, and the hour hand just past the 11. 10 minutes past 11. I didn't hand the clipboard back. I tossed it onto his desk. It landed with a sharp, loud smack that made Chloe jump in her seat. The silence in the room was sudden and absolute. "It is Thursday, April the 2nd, 2026, I said. My voice was no longer breathy or fragile. It was sharp, clear, and cut through the room like a scalpel. The President is exactly who we both know it is. And I don't have dementia, Dr. Sterling, though I do have a daughter-in-law who enjoys amateur pharmacy." Liam's jaw actually dropped. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him the shade of old parchment. "Mom, what are you doing?" "Margaret, I'm not sure I understand what's happening here," Dr. Sterling stammered, shifting uncomfortably in his expensive leather chair. "You're about to understand perfectly, Doctor," I said, unzipping my large leather purse. I pulled out the crisp manila folder and slapped it down on top of the clipboard. I opened it and slid the top document across the desk toward him. "I am a registered nurse with 40 years of clinical experience," I stated, staring Dr. Sterling down until he was forced to look at the paper. "What you are looking at is a forensic toxicology report from a private lab here in Chicago. It details the contents of a cup of chamomile tea my daughter-in-law served me last Tuesday. It contains approximately 15 milligrams of zolpidem tartrate, Ambien, administered without my knowledge or consent." Chloe gasped, a sharp, ugly sound. She pressed her hands to her mouth, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. "Mom, you're crazy!" Liam shouted, leaping to his feet, his voice pitching up an octave in panic. "Doctor, see? This is paranoia. She's having a psychotic break. She's making things up." "Am I, Liam?" I turned to him slowly, my eyes burning into his. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The quiet authority in my tone was far more lethal. Because I also have high-definition hidden camera footage of Chloe crushing the pills in my kitchen. I have the audio of you two discussing this exact appointment. I have the audio of you, Liam, saying you needed Dr. Sterling to act as a rubber stamp so you could stick me in a locked ward in Rockford. Dr. Sterling physically recoiled from the desk, pushing his chair back until it hit the wall. The tan on his face had completely vanished. He looked at the toxicology report, recognizing the official seal of the lab, and then looked at Liam as if my son were covered in radioactive waste. "Doctor," I said, turning my attention back to the sweating physician, "if you sign a single piece of paper suggesting I lack capacity, or if you process a power of attorney for these two individuals, my lawyer will file a complaint with the Illinois Medical Board before you finish your lunch. You will be named as a co-conspirator in a federal case of elder abuse, medical fraud, and attempted manslaughter. You will lose your license, your practice, and you will go to federal prison." I had no idea," Dr. Sterling stammered, raising both hands in the air in a gesture of total surrender. "Margaret, I swear to you, I was brought into this under false pretenses. I have not signed anything. There is no official record of this visit." "Then I suggest you leave this room," I said coldly, "because I need a private word with my son." Dr. Sterling didn't hesitate. He practically ran for the door, abandoning his own office, pulling it shut behind him with a quiet click. We were alone. Liam was hyperventilating. He backed away from me until he hit the examination table. Chloe was sobbing openly now, her carefully applied makeup running down her face in ugly black streaks. The reality of their situation was crashing down on them like a collapsing building. "Mom, please," Liam choked out, his hands trembling. You went through our stuff? You planted cameras? You poisoned my food, Liam." I finally raised my voice, the raw, visceral anger I had been suppressing for weeks cracking through the surface. "You drugged your own mother to steal my house. We were desperate," Chloe wailed, stepping forward, trying to play the victim. "You don't understand, Maggie. We're drowning in debt. The credit cards, the car. We were going to lose everything." "So your solution was to destroy me?" I stood up from the chair. I was shorter than Liam, but in that room I felt 10 feet tall. I walked toward him, and he instinctively shrank back. "You forged my signature, Liam." He froze. His breathing stopped completely. "That's right," I whispered, leaning in so close he could smell the mint on my breath. "I know about Marcus the broker. I know about the DocuSign. I know about the $50,000 home equity line of credit you illegally took out against my property to pay off your wife's Amex bill." Liam's knees gave out. He slid down the side of the examination table and crumpled onto the linoleum floor, burying his face in his hands. A low, pathetic moan escaped his lips. He was completely, utterly broken. "Mom, are you going to call the cops?" He wept into his hands. "Are you sending us to jail?" I looked down at the boy I had raised. I felt a profound, overwhelming grief for the son I thought I had, and an icy detachment from the pathetic man sobbing on the floor. "Jail is too easy," I said, my voice returning to a calm, deadpan delivery. "If you go to jail, you get free meals and a bed. No, Liam, I'm not calling the police. Not today." Chloe stopped crying, looking at me with frantic, confused hope. You're not?" "On one condition," I said, looking between the two of them. "You will never ever mention my mental health again. You will never attempt to acquire power of attorney. You will go home and you will pack your bags. You are moving out of my house by the end of the weekend." "Move out?" Liam looked up, his face a wet, red mess. "Mom, we have no money. The HELOC paid the credit cards, but the first monthly payment on the loan is due in 2 weeks. If we don't pay it, the bank will foreclose on the house." "They will certainly try," I said, a dark, vindictive smile touching the corners of my mouth. "But it's your house!" Chloe screamed, her panic returning. "If we don't pay the loan we took out in your name, you'll be homeless too. The bank will take the property." I looked at them. The beautiful, terrible irony of it all was almost too sweet to bear. They thought they had trapped me. They thought I was a poor, helpless widow who would be ruined if they defaulted on the fraudulent loan. They didn't know about Thomas. They didn't know about the $1.2 million sitting securely in a trust, untouchable by the bank, untouched by the HELOC. They didn't know that my lawyer, Robert, and I had already engineered a plan to let the bank seize the house, only to have my anonymous LLC buy it right back for pennies on the dollar, legally wiping the $50,000 debt and clearing my name entirely. I was going to let them sweat. I was going to let them believe they had ruined me, while the anxiety of an impending foreclosure ate them alive from the inside out. "Then I guess we'll all just have to see what the bank does, won't we?" I said smoothly, picking up my purse. I turned my back on them and walked toward the door. "Mom, wait! How are we supposed to live? Where are we supposed to go?" Liam cried out from the floor, his voice echoing in the sterile clinic room. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. I didn't turn around. "You're a smart boy, Liam," I said coldly. "Figure it out. But if I see either of you in my house come Monday morning, the police get the lab report. The choice is yours." I opened the door and walked out into the hallway, leaving them trapped in the nightmare of their own making. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I could finally breathe. But I wasn't done with them. The real twist, the one that would leave them with absolutely nothing, was still waiting in the wings. The weekend following the disastrous appointment at Dr. Sterling's clinic was the longest 48 hours of my life. I fully expected Liam and Chloe to pack their bags and slink out the front door in the dead of night, too ashamed to face me. But I had severely underestimated the sheer, unadulterated entitlement of my daughter-in-law. Sunday evening arrived, and not a single cardboard box had been packed. I walked into the kitchen to make dinner and found Chloe sitting at the island, aggressively tapping on her iPad. Liam was standing behind her, looking pale and nauseous. "I thought I made myself clear," I said, my voice eerily calm as I pulled a kettle from the cabinet. "You were supposed to be out by tonight." Chloe didn't even look up from her screen. "Actually, Maggie, we're not going anywhere. I spent the weekend consulting with a tenants' rights group online. We've been living at this address for 3 years. We receive mail here. By Illinois state law, we are established tenants. You can't just kick us out with a verbal threat. You have to serve us with a formal, written 30-day eviction notice." She finally looked up, a triumphant, venomous smirk twisting her lips. "So if you want us gone, take us to civil court. But until then, we're staying right here." I looked at my son. He couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the floor, letting his wife use the law to squat in the home of the woman he had just tried to drug and commit. For a second, the urge to march upstairs, grab the toxicology report, and call the police was overwhelming. I could have them arrested right then and there, but I remembered the plan. I remembered the $1.2 million sitting in my trust and the anonymous LLC I had created. Arresting them now would give them a way out. A messy, legal battle, but a resolution. I didn't want a resolution. I wanted them to feel the walls closing in. "Fine," I said smoothly, turning on the stove. 30 days, which brings us right to the week of Thanksgiving. Consider this your verbal notice. The written one will be taped to your bedroom door by morning. The Cold War began. We lived like ghosts haunting the same house. They stayed in their room or the living room. I stayed in the kitchen or my bedroom. We didn't speak. But the silence was shattered 2 weeks later when the mail arrived. I was the one who checked the mailbox that afternoon. Sitting amongst the junk mail and grocery circulars was a thick, ominous envelope from the bank that held the HELOC. Stamped across the front in bold red letters were the words, "Urgent, time-sensitive material enclosed." I walked into the house, clutching the envelope. Liam was sitting on the sofa, aggressively chewing on his thumbnail, staring at his laptop screen. He was desperately applying for higher-paying jobs, though his resume was as thin as his work ethic. I walked over and dropped the envelope directly onto his keyboard. He jumped, startled. He looked at the bank's logo, and I watched the blood completely drain from his face. His hands trembled as he tore the envelope open. Chloe walked out of the kitchen, sipping a sparkling water, and froze when she saw her husband's face. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tight. It's a notice of default," Liam whispered, his eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. "And an intent to foreclose. They're demanding the past due balance, plus late fees, plus an accelerated payment of the principal because the loan is flagged as high risk. If we don't pay $5,000 by the end of the month, they initiate foreclosure proceedings on the house." Chloe dropped her sparkling water. The can hit the rug, fizzing and spraying over my vintage coffee table, but neither of them noticed. $5,000? She shrieked. "Liam, we don't have $500. The credit cards are maxed out again from the groceries and my car payment." Liam looked up at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, pleading terror. Mom, you have to help us. If they foreclose, you lose the house. You'll be out on the street. Your credit will be ruined." This was it, the moment for my Oscar-worthy performance. I let my shoulders collapse. I brought my hands up to my face, taking a deep, shuddering breath, and forced my eyes to well up with tears. When I looked back at him, I was the picture of a broken, terrified widow. "Help you?" I cried, my voice cracking perfectly. With what, Liam? I live on a fixed nursing pension and Social Security. I have exactly $412 in my checking account. I don't have $5,000. You have savings. You have to have a retirement fund, Chloe yelled, her composure completely shattered. Cash it out. I drained my savings to pay for your wedding, I shouted back, pointing a trembling finger at her. The tears spilled over, hot and entirely manufactured. I have nothing left. Because of you. Because you forged my name, Liam. I sank into the armchair, burying my face in my hands, sobbing loudly. I'm going to lose my home. I'm 66 years old and I'm going to be homeless. Where am I supposed to go? A women's shelter? Is that what you wanted? Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Liam dropped to his knees in front of my chair, trying to grab my hands, but I yanked them away. I'll call the bank. I'll beg for an extension. I'll figure something out. You can't figure anything out, I wailed, standing up and backing away from him. You ruined us. You ruined me. I turned and fled up the stairs, slamming my bedroom door behind me as loudly as I could. Once inside, I locked the door. I leaned against the wood, listening to the muffled sounds of Liam and Chloe screaming at each other downstairs. The panic in their voices was music to my ears. I walked over to my vanity mirror, picked up a tissue, and calmly dabbed the fake tears from my cheeks. My heart was beating fast, but not from fear, from the pure adrenaline of absolute control. I opened my burner laptop and initiated a secure video call. Robert Vance's face appeared on the screen. He was sitting in his plush Seattle office, sipping coffee. Maggie, you look surprisingly radiant for a woman facing imminent foreclosure. The letters arrived today, Robert, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. My son is currently having a nervous breakdown in the living room. How are things on your end? Moving like clockwork, Robert chuckled, tapping a file on his desk. I spoke with the bank's asset recovery department this morning, representing Ironclad Holdings LLC. As expected, they are absolutely thrilled at the prospect of offloading a bad debt without having to go through the lengthy, expensive process of a contested foreclosure and eviction. Here is the brilliant, ruthless beauty of the American banking system. Banks don't actually want to own houses. They want cash. When a loan goes bad, they are often willing to sell the debt, or the property itself via a short sale, to an all-cash buyer for a fraction of the cost, just to clear the toxic asset off their books. So they accepted the offer? I asked, leaning closer to the screen. They accepted, Robert confirmed, his eyes gleaming. Ironclad Holdings is purchasing the property in a pre-foreclosure short sale. Because you, the homeowner, are voluntarily agreeing to sign over the deed to avoid a foreclosure mark on your credit, the bank is wiping the $50,000 HELOC completely clean. They take a slight loss, Ironclad gets the house at a steep discount, and Margaret Sullivan walks away with zero debt and her credit score perfectly intact. And Ironclad Holdings, I prompted, is owned 100% by your trust, Robert finished. Which means, Maggie, by next Tuesday, you will legally be your own landlord, and your son and daughter-in-law will be unauthorized squatters residing in a property owned by a faceless, aggressive corporate entity. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 3 years. It was foolproof. I had saved my house, erased my son's fraudulent debt from my name, and secured my future, all without Liam or Chloe knowing a single thing. To them, the house was lost to the bank. Draft the final eviction notices from Ironclad, I told Robert. Have a process server ready to deliver them. I want them served on Thanksgiving Day. Savage, Maggie, Robert laughed. I love it. I'll have the papers drawn up. I ended the call and spent the next hour reading a novel, perfectly at peace. Downstairs, the fighting continued. By Friday of that week, the atmosphere in the house had degraded from tense to apocalyptic. The reality of impending poverty had finally set in for Chloe. For the entirety of their relationship, Chloe had operated under the assumption that Liam was her safety net. Even if he didn't make a fortune at his marketing job, she knew he was an only child and I was a homeowner. In her shallow, transactional mind, she was merely waiting for me to die so they could inherit the equity. She had tolerated him, tolerated me, for the promise of a payday. Now the house was being foreclosed on. The equity was gone. Liam was $50,000 in debt to a bank that would soon be garnishing his wages. He had zero assets, terrible credit, and the looming threat of a felony fraud charge hanging over his head if I ever decided to go to the police. Liam was no longer a safety net. He was a sinking ship, and rats, as they say, are always the first to flee. I was sitting in the kitchen that afternoon, quietly sipping a cup of Earl Grey tea, when I heard the heavy, rhythmic thumping of something being dragged down the wooden stairs. I stepped out into the hallway. Chloe was dragging 2 massive, matching Louis Vuitton suitcases down the steps. She was dressed impeccably in a beige trench coat, oversized designer sunglasses pushed up onto her perfectly blown-out hair. She looked like she was heading to the VIP lounge at O'Hare, not fleeing a financial disaster. Liam was rushing down the stairs after her, his face flushed, his hands frantically grabbing at her arm. "Chloe, stop! Please, just stop and talk to me," he begged, his voice cracking with desperation. "Don't touch my coat, Liam, you'll wrinkle it," she snapped, jerking her arm away with a look of profound disgust. She hauled the suitcases the rest of the way down and dragged them toward the front door. "Where are you going?" Liam pleaded, stepping in front of the door to block her exit. "You can't just leave. We're in this together. We have to figure out a plan." Chloe stopped. She took off her sunglasses, and I finally saw the absolute glacial emptiness in her eyes. There was no love there. There wasn't even pity. There was only the cold calculation of a woman cutting her losses. "There is no we, Liam," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "There hasn't been a we since you told me the bank was taking the house. My plan is to go to my parents' house in Naperville. Your plan is to figure out how you're going to survive living in your car." "We took vows," Liam shouted, tears welling up in his eyes. "For richer or poorer, Chloe, you promised." Chloe let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed in the foyer. "I promised for richer or poorer, Liam. I didn't promise for stupid and homeless. You forged your mother's signature and you still managed to lose the house. You're incompetent. You're broke. And frankly, you're pathetic." She reached into her designer handbag, pulled out a thick manila envelope, and slapped it hard against Liam's chest. He reflexively caught it. "My lawyer will be in touch," she said flatly. "Don't try to call me. I've already blocked your number." Liam stared down at the envelope. Even from 10 feet away, I could see the words "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage" printed at the top of the documents. "Chloe, please," Liam whimpered, completely shattered. He looked like a little boy whose balloon had just popped. "Move," she commanded. Liam, thoroughly defeated, stepped aside. Chloe opened the front door. A sleek black Uber SUV was idling in my driveway. The driver got out and began loading her expensive luggage into the trunk. Chloe didn't look back. She didn't say goodbye to him, and she certainly didn't say goodbye to me. She walked out the door, climbed into the back of the SUV, and the car pulled away, disappearing down the suburban street. The silence that fell over the house was deafening. Liam stood in the foyer, holding the divorce papers, staring at the closed front door. His shoulders began to shake. A deep, guttural sob ripped out of his throat, and he slowly slid down the wall until he was sitting on the hardwood floor, burying his face in his hands, weeping uncontrollably. I stood by the kitchen doorway, watching him. Part of me, the old Maggie, the mother who had scrubbed floors and worked night shifts to give him everything, felt a painful, familiar tug in my chest. It is a terrible thing to watch your child break. My instinct, honed over 35 years, was to rush over to him, pull him into my arms, stroke his hair, and tell him that Mommy would fix it. I could tell him about the inheritance. I could pay off his debt. I could wipe his tears away and make the bad things disappear, just like I did when he scraped his knee as a boy. But I looked at the divorce papers in his hand. I remembered the toxicology report sitting safely in my purse. I remembered the hidden camera footage of him laughing with his wife about locking me in a psychiatric ward. He wasn't crying because he felt remorse for what he did to me. He was crying because he had been caught. He was crying because he had lost his trophy wife, and because he thought he was going to be poor. He was a victim of his own greed, mourning the consequences of his own actions. I took a sip of my tea. It was still warm. I didn't walk over to him. I didn't offer a word of comfort. I simply turned around, walked back into the kitchen, and started preparing my dinner. He had exactly 5 days left in my house, and when Thanksgiving arrived, the final curtain would fall. Gemini deny, Thanksgiving is traditionally a holiday defined by its sensory experiences. The rich, savory smell of roasting turkey, the muffled sounds of a parade playing on the television, the warmth of a house filled with family. But on this particular Thanksgiving Thursday, my house was as cold and silent as a mausoleum. Liam had spent the 5 days since Chloe's departure existing in a state of catatonic shock. He slept on the sofa in the same wrinkled clothes, surrounded by empty takeout containers. He hadn't showered. He hadn't gone to work. He had called in sick, though I suspected he was on the verge of being fired anyway. He was a man waiting for the executioner, terrified of the impending foreclosure, mourning a wife who had discarded him like a piece of junk mail. I, on the other hand, had spent the week preparing for a rebirth. At 9 a.m., I was in my upstairs bedroom, sitting at my vanity. I took my time. I applied a layer of expensive foundation I had bought at Nordstrom the day before. I wore a tailored emerald green wool dress that draped perfectly, accessorized with a string of genuine Mikimoto pearls I had purchased with a fraction of my first month's passive income from the commercial plaza. I slipped on a pair of leather pumps. When I looked in the mirror, the tired, stooped, gray-faced widow was gone. Staring back at me was a matriarch of formidable wealth and absolute authority. At 10:15 a.m., the silence of the house was broken by the heavy, grinding roar of a diesel engine pulling into my driveway. I walked to the window and parted the blinds. A massive, professional moving truck was parked on my front lawn, crushing the dormant autumn grass. Behind it, idling, was a silver Mercedes S-Class. Chloe stepped out of the passenger side of the Mercedes, bundled in a designer cashmere wrap. From the driver's side emerged her father, Richard Kensington, a wealthy, arrogant real estate developer who had always treated me with thinly veiled disdain. Her mother, Susan, stepped out of the back, adjusting her oversized sunglasses and looking at my modest suburban home as if it were an infectious disease. They had come for Chloe's things: the custom Italian leather sofa she had bought on Liam's credit card, the espresso machine, the designer rugs. She was taking the spoils of her fraudulent marriage before the bank could lock the doors. I smiled. The timing couldn't have been more poetic. I listened to the front door open downstairs. Liam hadn't even bothered to lock it. I heard the heavy boots of the movers entering the foyer, followed by the sharp, clicking heels of Susan and Chloe. "God, it smells like stale beer and depression in here." Chloe's voice drifted up the stairs, sharp and cruel. "You guys start in the living room. The sectional sofa, the television, and the imported coffee table. Be careful with the marble top." "Chloe?" I heard Liam's voice, raspy and weak. What are you doing?" "Taking what's mine, Liam," she snapped. "Before the bank forecloses and locks it all inside. My lawyer said I have every right to retrieve my personal property." "Liam, really?" Richard Kensington's booming, pompous voice echoed in my hallway. "You should be thanking us for handling this quietly. It's a tragedy what you've done to your mother's finances. But frankly, I always knew you lacked the business acumen to maintain a household. Chloe is lucky to be escaping this sinking ship." I picked up a thick, leather-bound portfolio from my bed. Inside were 3 distinct folders. I walked out of my bedroom and stood at the top of the staircase, looking down at the spectacle unfolding in my foyer. "No one is taking a single piece of furniture out of this house," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried a resonant, icy command that instantly froze the room. The 2 burly movers paused with their hands on the living room sofa. Liam looked up from the floor, his bloodshot eyes widening at the sight of me. Chloe, Richard, and Susan all turned to stare. For a moment, they were completely speechless. They were expecting the frail, confused old woman in an oversized cardigan, crying over her lost home. They were not expecting the polished, imposing woman descending the stairs with the posture of a queen. Susan Kensington was the first to recover her snobbery. "Margaret," she said, her lips pursing into a tight, condescending smile. "Dressing up won't change reality, dear. The bank is taking the house. Chloe is simply securing her investments. It's such a shame you couldn't manage your finances better in your old age." I reached the bottom of the stairs and walked slowly into the center of the living room, stopping a few feet away from the Kensington family. Liam scrambled to his feet, hovering anxiously in the background. "You're right about one thing, Susan," I said smoothly, running a hand over the smooth leather of my portfolio. "Reality cannot be changed, but your perception of reality? That is about to be violently altered." I looked at the movers. "Gentlemen, you can step outside. You won't be carrying anything out of here today." The movers, sensing the radioactive tension in the room, didn't argue. They dropped the sofa cushions and practically sprinted out the front door, leaving it ajar. "Maggie, don't make this difficult," Chloe sighed, crossing her arms, trying to project boredom. "You don't own this stuff. Liam bought it. Liam bought it with a $50,000 home equity line of credit, drawn against this house, using a forged signature," I corrected. my voice dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. Chloe flinched. Richard Kensington's heavy brows furrowed. "What did you say?" he demanded, looking at Liam. "Forged? Oh, did she leave that part out, Richard?" I smiled a terrible, predatory smile. "Did your daughter forget to mention that she and my son committed felony wire fraud and elder abuse to pay off her Amex bills? Did she mention the hidden camera footage I have of her crushing 15 milligrams of zolpidem into my evening tea to manufacture a dementia diagnosis so they could lock me in a psychiatric ward?" Susan gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth. The color drained completely from Richard's face. He turned to look at his daughter. "Chloe, tell me she's lying." Chloe opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. She looked at Liam for help, but Liam was paralyzed, staring at me in absolute, mind-shattering horror. "Mom, the cameras," Liam choked out, his voice a pathetic squeak. "You knew?" "I knew everything, Liam," I said, my gaze pinning him to the wall. "I knew about the loan. I knew about Dr. Sterling. I knew you planned to throw me away like garbage." "This is insane," Chloe suddenly shrieked, her panic manifesting as rage. "Even if you know, it doesn't matter. The bank is taking the house. You're ruined anyway. My dad is right. We're leaving this sinking ship." "About that sinking ship," I said, opening the leather portfolio. I pulled out the first document. It was printed on heavy, watermarked legal paper. I tossed it onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a satisfying slap. "As of 8 a.m. yesterday morning, this property is no longer in default," I announced, pacing slowly around the room. "The bank approved a pre-foreclosure short sale. They wrote off the toxic debt, meaning Liam's fraudulent loan is officially erased from my name, and sold the deed to an all-cash buyer." "A cash buyer?" Richard frowned, his real estate instincts kicking in. "Who?" "A private Delaware corporation named Ironclad Holdings, LLC, I replied. Liam let out a breath, a manic, hysterical laugh bubbling up in his chest. "So we lost the house anyway. Some corporation bought it. You're still getting kicked out, Mom." I stopped pacing. I looked at my son with a mixture of pity and profound disgust. I reached into the portfolio, pulled out the second folder, and dropped it next to the deed. "Open it, Liam," I commanded. Trembling, Liam stepped forward, picked up the folder, and flipped it open. It was the incorporation paperwork for Ironclad Holdings, LLC. His eyes scanned the lines until they hit the bottom of the page, the sole managing member and financial beneficiary of the trust that owned the company. Margaret A. Sullivan. Liam dropped the folder as if it had burned his hands. He stumbled backward, his knees hitting the edge of the sofa. You bought your own house?" "For pennies on the dollar," I confirmed, my voice ringing with triumph. "I let the bank erase the debt you created, and then I bought my property back. I am the corporation, Liam. I own this house, free, clear, and unencumbered." "But how?" Chloe stammered, her arrogant facade completely shattered. "You're a retired nurse. You don't have that kind of cash." "Which brings me to the third document," I said softly. I didn't toss this one. I handed it directly to Richard Kensington, knowing he was the only one in the room who would truly comprehend the gravity of the numbers. It was a certified bank statement from my private wealth management account. Richard adjusted his reading glasses. He looked at the paper. He blinked, pulled the glasses down, wiped them, and looked again. His jaw physically dropped. $1.2 million, Richard whispered, the paper shaking in his hands. "Liquid?" Liam let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. $1 million? Mom, where did you get $1 million? "From your Uncle Thomas," I said, looking at Liam. "He passed away last month. He left me his entire estate. I came home the very same day I found out, ready to share the news with you, ready to pay off your debts, buy you a house, give you the world." I paused, letting the weight of my words hang in the air like a guillotine blade. "But when I went to use Chloe's iPad, I saw your text messages with the broker. I saw you plotting to steal my home and lock me in an asylum." Liam fell to his knees, literally collapsed onto the hardwood floor, his hands gripping his hair, letting out a wail of pure, unadulterated agony. It was the sound of a man realizing he had just burned a winning lottery ticket. "Mom, no, please, no," he sobbed, crawling toward me. "I didn't know. I'm sorry. I love you, Mom. Please forgive me." I stepped back, pulling my hem away from his grasping hands. "You don't love me, Liam. You love my utility. You love what I can do for you. But the well is officially dry. Chloe, meanwhile, was experiencing a rapid, terrifying recalibration in her calculating brain. Her husband, whom she had just filed to divorce for being broke, was the only son of a millionaire. "Maggie," Chloe started, her voice suddenly sickeningly sweet, taking a step toward me with her hands clasped in front of her. "This has all been a terrible misunderstanding. The stress of the debt. It made us crazy. But we're family. We can fix this. Liam and I, we can tear up the divorce papers today." I looked at her, truly amazed by the depth of her sociopathy. But before I could address her, Richard Kensington spoke up. He had been staring at the second page of the bank statement, the page detailing the passive income assets. "Margaret," Richard said, his voice completely devoid of its previous arrogance, replaced by a desperate, fawning respect. "It says here you are the sole owner of a commercial plaza in downtown Seattle, the Hayes Building." I smiled, the final twist of the knife. "Yes, Richard. My brother, Thomas Hayes, built it in the 90s. Richard looked like he was going to have a stroke. "Margaret, I have been trying to buy that plaza from Thomas's estate for 2 years. My development firm desperately needs that footprint to complete our luxury condo project. It's the crown jewel. I had no idea it went to you." He stepped forward, practically pushing his daughter out of the way. "Listen to me, Margaret. We are practically family. If you're willing to sell, I will offer you 20% above market value right now. Cash. We can keep this in the family." I looked at the wealthy, pompous man who had spent 3 years treating me like the hired help. I looked at his daughter, who had poisoned me. I looked at my son, sobbing on the floor. "Keep it in the family?" I repeated, letting out a sharp, genuine laugh. "Richard, I wouldn't sell you a glass of water if you were on fire. In fact, I had my lawyer, Robert Vance, reach out to your direct competitor, the Sterling Group, yesterday afternoon. They offered 30% above market value, and I accepted." Richard stumbled backward as if I had shot him in the chest. "The Sterling Group? You just killed my flagship project. You ruined me." "No, Richard," I said, my voice cold as ice. "Your daughter tried to ruin me. Consider this collateral damage." I reached into my portfolio one last time and pulled out a single sheet of paper, handing it to a weeping Liam. "This is a formal, legally binding notice of eviction, served on behalf of Ironclad Holdings, LLC, I stated, my voice echoing in the silent house. "You have exactly 24 hours to vacate this property. If you or Chloe are on these premises by noon tomorrow, the police will be called for criminal trespassing. And I promise you, if you force me to call the police, I will hand them the toxicology report." "Mom, where am I supposed to go?" Liam wept, clutching the eviction notice to his chest. "I have no money. I have nothing." "You have exactly what you gave me," I said quietly. "Nothing." I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need to hear their excuses, their begging, or their tears. The performance was over. The curtain had fallen. I turned around, walked past the stunned Kensington family, and out my own front door. The crisp November air hit my face, smelling of pine needles and wood smoke. It smelled like freedom. A sleek black town car was idling at the curb, arranged by Robert Vance. The driver, a polite young man in a suit, opened the rear door for me. "To the airport, Mrs. Sullivan?" he asked respectfully. "Yes, please," I replied, sliding into the plush leather seat. "First class to Seattle." As the car pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back at the house. I didn't look back at the life I had spent 40 years building, or the son I had lost to greed. I looked forward. My brother Thomas had given me a gift, not just the money, but the permission to finally be selfish, to be untouchable. I was 66 years old, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't Liam's mother, or a hospital nurse, or a burden to be discarded. I was Maggie Sullivan, and my life was just beginning.